The story of Atlantis is an oral retelling, which was recorded much later than its existence by the philosopher and enlightener Plato. His works are usually attributed to 360 BC, when no one remembered Atlantis, and perhaps never knew. At least, nowhere is there evidence that such land existed. Plato himself called the people who inhabited this land Atlanteans, the neighbors of the ancient Greeks. Although this story supposedly came from Egypt, where the priest for a long time was the Athenian Solon, a relative of Plato. Atlantis is not derived from the Atlantic. This land bore the name of the son of the god Poseidon, a Greek deity who had a relationship with the earthly woman Plato. She bore him 10 sons. And the god of the seas divided the island into parts, and allowed the sons to rule their territories themselves. Atlas was the eldest son, so the island and the ocean around it were named after him. Gedare was the second brother. His name will later appear in the history of Atlantis. Atlantis is sought wherever there are islands in the ocean, referring to its name, which is associated with the Atlantic Ocean. Surveyed areas of the Canary, Balearic, Azores and British Isles, but no results yet. Enthusiasts have already started talking about research in the Black Sea and Antarctica. But it is better to return to Plato, which tells of a country emerging from the waters of the ocean, where there were also the Pillars of Hercules, and this is closer to Gibraltar. It is interesting that Spain is located nearby, where cities have recently been discovered, reminiscent of the famous facts about Atlantis in architecture and content. They were discovered during the archaeological expedition of the University of Hartford, and they are located just opposite the Pillars, at Cadiz. Cadiz is at least years old, but some chronicles send researchers to more ancient times. Then supposedly called this city Hades, it turns out that the prince Plato spoke of was from these places, id est Gedare, as stated in the writings of Plato. This was allegedly known to those Egyptian sages who spoke of the Atlanteans to Solon, who brought this message to Greece. The priest said that Athens itself is much older than the Greeks themselves say. If you add up all the numbers that denoted the events told by the priests, it turns out that Atlantis disappeared in 9500 BC. Plato wrote several books about Atlantis. These are Timaeus and Critias. But historians say that there is the likelihood of another book, Hermocrates. At the same time, Critias was not completely preserved or was not completed until the end. The narrative breaks short. There is a hint in the books that the story of Atlanta will be continued, and it will be devoted to Hermocrate. Historians know that he was a warrior who led the defense of Syracuse during the Peloponnesian War. Perhaps the third part was about this, and the descendants missed the opportunity to find out why Syracuse did not fall then. Historical events are similar to those set forth by Plato. The philosopher is sure that the Athenians defeated the Atlanteans, despite the scale and power of this state. All information about Atlantis often comes down to the representation of this country as a large flowering island in the ocean. It seems that the Greeks inattentively read a text that says that Atlantis was an empire ruled from the island. The state included land, from Libya to the Pillars of Heracles, to Egypt, and from Europe to Tyrrhenia. Tyrrhenia is today's Italy. But the government was carried out from the island of Atlas. In honor of his father Poseidon, his sons erected a palace on the island. It towered to the skies, and in the palace square there was a huge statue that depicted a giant chariot in which Poseidon was seated. It was made of gold. Atlantis was far from a poor country. She fully provided herself with everything necessary, therefore she did not seek communication with other states and territories. The Atlanteans developed agriculture. They were able to make rare metal alloys and grow crystals. There is a legend that the Atlanteans had an unusual crystal, which provided them with energy and protected the country from attacks by enemies. Retelling the story of Atlantis, Plato's relative, Solon, considered one of the wisest people in the country, spoke of a huge island that surrounded the ocean. Allegedly, the Egyptians told him that Atlantis opens the way to other lands, from where you can get to the opposite continent that surrounded the real ocean. The adjacent land can be called a truly endless continent. The description is similar to America, which at that time was difficult or impossible to reach, if you did not take into account the alleged superpowers and powerful technologies of the Atlanteans. One way or another, the glory of Atlantis came to our own. What happened with Atlantis? Did this happen as a result of a war or a planetary climate failure? Unanswered questions, but we will definitely figure it out. That's all for today. Like and subscribe. It will be more interesting further.